This episode contains raw and honest discussions around suicide attempts, domestic violence, and other mental health challenges. Some of what you'll hear may be distressing, so please do listen with care. Welcome to the Midlife Men podcast with me, Philip Briscoe. In today's episode, I'm joined by Adam Smith, a professional chef turned social entrepreneur, and the thoughts behind the Real Junk Food Project and Surplus to Purpose. Adam's journey is inspiring, taking from kitchens around the world to the front line of the fight against food waste. And all of this from a very challenging start in life, not least being found dead in a car 13 years ago. So welcome, Adam.
Thanks for having me, Phil.
So let's start with that statement then. You were found dead in a car 13 years ago. Quite an unusual statement to start an interview with. But could you go back to perhaps what led up to that moment?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't just a single thing that happened. It was that wasn't the case, even though it was an event as such. You could argue that it was probably 20 odd years in the making. It's not something that I can particularly say is easy to just explain how that happened, because there was lots of things, and since then I've been in therapy and done lots of things like this, speaking to people and opening up and speaking to other men and etc. And you realise that the more you delve into things like child development and trauma and processing, and obviously I'm diagnosed autistic as well and neurodivergent about 4 years ago, you start looking back on all the things that you did as a kid and said as a kid, and things that happened to you, and how so it was probably a consequence of 20 years of misunderstandings and my behaviour and just not fitting into a world that suited me. And at the time when it happened, post the event, there was lots of talk around what I'd done particularly and things that happened to me. But since then, especially the kind of since a neurodivergent kind of diagnosis is, talking about just how my interactions are with people, how I see the world. There's lots and lots of things. So yeah, I wish I could just pinpoint a single thing that happened and then it tipped me over the edge, but it just wasn't. That wasn't the case at all. It was an unfortunate series of events throughout my entire life, really. And you could pin it on pretty much any one of them, because some of them were quite horrific and traumatic. Just a single thing, I could speak about would probably put a lot of people in that position. But I had a series of them for many, many years. So, if anything, I don't even know I got to that age and did it. So just lots and lots of factors, I think, Phil. Substance abuse, homelessness, abuse, neglect. Yeah, where do you start? I mean, it was just an unfortunate childhood, really. And, it's hard to say my behaviour was a part of what happened, because I see young kids now and I think I can see why they're doing that. I can see why they're acting that way. And it's not just about wanting attention or not fitting in. There's other things going on here behind the scenes, and there's simple things that people probably could have done, to the point where when I went back into therapy 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I think it was, I got an apology from my therapist at the time, who said that she remembered me from when I was a kid. And she said, CAMS failed you. We absolutely failed. We didn't understand neurodivergence back then. We didn't understand what we know now about processing trauma, etc., and the impact it has on development and stuff. So, I was sectioned. I was imprisoned. I was placed into care, everything. And it was just nobody. I was quite smart and quite a charming kid, I guess people say. But all that was just a front. It was a mask. And now that, I've been diagnosed neurodivergent, I now understand that nobody intervened or said anything, because I thought he'll be all right. And I wasn't all right. And clearly I wasn't all right because of what I did. And you start thinking to yourself, well, I'm going to be all right. Or, or no one cares. Or, well, that's what the adult's saying. It's not until you get an adult that you start realizing, actually, why didn't anybody pick up when I was 4 or 5 that these things were happening? Why didn't nobody pick up when I did this thing or I said this? I remember in school when I was really, really young, I called a teacher a dummy. And I'd watched an episode of Simpsons, and Bart Simpson had called his teacher a dummy. And I went to school and she was called Mrs. Sutton. I'll never forget her. Can't remember what she looked like, but I'll just never forget she was called Mrs. Sutton. And I just called her a dummy. She sent a letter home. She sent me home with a letter to tell my parents. My parents had to come in. And even still to this day, I was like, I don't understand why I got in trouble for that. Because I copied it, and that's what I did. I copied the world around me because I was neurodivergent, and nobody picked up on it. And I thought, even when I was a kid, there was telltale signs that things were different for me, and nobody picked up on them. And it led to that day where, obviously I tried to take my own life, and I just feel like it could have been prevented a long time ago.
So you were left to kind of work things out for yourself, but probably without the tools to do that.
The thing about working things out for yourself, even now, Phil, is that I didn't have any role models. I watched David Attenborough growing up. He was my role model for a lot of people. He is as well, for lots of different reasons. And I didn't have anything to compare against. It's not like I could go to my parents and say, what should I do? Or, what would you do? I didn't have that. So I had to make stuff up. And the only thing I knew how to make stuff up was by copying, and I copied things that were in my life. So seeing my dad being, a drunk and committing domestic violence towards my mum and every woman that he had after that. When I got to a certain stage in my life, that's all I knew. So when I went pretty wild as a late teen, early 20s, I didn't have anything to compare it against. That's all I knew. So yeah, it's hard because I never understood. I knew what was right and wrong. Instinctively, I knew what was right and wrong, but I didn't have any barriers or anything to stop me from going as far as I wanted to go. I think that was the biggest problem. So if my friends went out for a quiet drink one weekend, I'd go out for a quiet drink and end up on a plane to Thailand. That was what I did, the extremes. And I literally did that. I took out a £5,000 loan and went to Thailand for 8 days because my mates dared me because they were out drinking. That was what I did. And it was funny at the time. This was pre-mobile phones, thank God. But, there was telltale signs that something wasn't quite right. And where would this end up? And I think it just could have been easily have prevented, or something could have intervened. But who's the person that intervenes? Who's the person that prevents it? Who's that person, or who's that thing that stops it? And a lot of people say it's only yourself that can. But like you said, I didn't know anything different. I just carried on doing what I thought I should do. I got attention for it, and everybody wants attention, especially those that have not been loved or have been neglected. So I carried on.
Was there a kind of tipping point, a point where something had to change?
The attempt to take my own life obviously was enough. Not many people can tell the story that I can tell, because as I say to people, even those that are crying out for help or even self-harming and showing signs of trauma and etc., unless you get past the point of no return, it's very, very hard for people to understand what that entails physically and mentally. And I did. I went past that, and I had no intention of coming back. And I did. I don't know how, but it happened, and I'm here. It's not an epiphany moment either. It's not like you go, oh wow, look, I've seen the light, and therefore I should start doing something good now, or etc. It wasn't that at all. It was just like, in fact, it was my friend who was on my bedside at the time, and he turned around to me and said, you might as well stop doing this because you're not very good at it. And even though it was like a joke, and we laughed about it and stuff, but it meant so much to me because he was right. Like, I was putting all my energy into this destructive behaviour and getting nothing out of it except for prison and being very close to death. So I felt, what happens if I put my energy into something that was a bit more positive, and what does that mean? Because I'd never been in that world before. So I guess that was it. It was just a journey. I mean, that was 12, 13 years ago now, and I'm still on it. It's not like I've achieved it. I've not set out an ultimate goal. I'm still on it, and I still have the down days, and I still have the rubbish days, and I still have the times where I kind of go back into that mode, but I can get out of it. And that's what I tell people as well. It's a rocky journey, but it's about not going back to that person and not going back to that behavior, and learning from those mistakes very quickly, and doing something more positive. And that's the reason why obviously I do what I do, is because I had this infectious energy that people wanted to be around me. And when I did the bad things, people were around me for the wrong reasons. And then when I started doing kind of more positive things, then I realized that I surrounded myself with people that I wanted to be around, and good people who believed in me and supported me and pushed me. So
how did you then make the next step to becoming training to be a chef, if that was the next step? And how did that help, I guess, that next step in the journey?
It wasn't necessarily a step, it was more a mindset. So I said I wasn't going to not, I mean, it's just going to sound really silly, but I grew up with Eminem, and I loved him. I loved his lyrics, loved everything he'd been through, and he meant so much to me. Probably got me through some really dark times. And that song 8 Mile, if you have one shot, one opportunity, would you grasp it or let it slip? And I just decided to myself that I would just grasp every opportunity and say yes. And I started just saying yes to everything. I know it sounds really silly and trivial, but I did. And I just thought I'll just say yeah. And I was working in call centers at the time, and I was doing some mundane jobs. Didn't finish college and just being a bit of a bum. And my friend said, why don't you just come and wash pots for us at TGI Fridays on like Boxing Day, which was like the busiest day of the year. And it was just the silliest thing I'd ever done. I got soaking wet. I was there till about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, just couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. I hated it. And I remember having to take all my clothes off and like walk around in somebody else's clothes because I got absolutely soaking wet. It was just the worst experience. This was like my first shift. And I went back for some stupid reason, and I was around my friends who I'd grown up with, and that was the only thing I had. So I just went back. And then from then on, I've gone on to feed over 25 million people across the world doing the project that I do. So it was just a kind of like, if a door's been opened, just to walk through it, because even though it's the fear of the unknown, you don't know where it's going to lead you. And it might not be where you want to be at the time, but you might end up where you should be. And it was just a mindset. It was as simple as that. It was just, I don't have the answers. And with all due respect, Phil, none of us have the answers. We're all blagging it. But it was just say yes, take the opportunities, don't worry about the consequences, and just be real and transparent and honest about it. And that's led me to where I am today.
So that was perhaps even fate that your mindset took you to TGI Fridays as a pot wash on Boxing Day, actually then led to feeding 25 million people. I mean, that's a kind of sliding doors moment, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's not something that you can't plan it, can you? You're not going to sit in front of a careers teacher and say that that's where I'm going to start and that's where I'm going to end up. Like, nobody's planning that, which I think is really beautiful about it. But I also think it's great to get across to people as well, is that you don't have to worry about the end result. You just have to worry about how you're going to get there. And like I said, positive mindset, surrounding myself with good people, and realizing that this thing that had happened to me from a very early age of abuse and trauma and neglect and everything else that happened, that's always going to stay with me, but it's not going to allow me to get to the depths where I was anymore. I talk to people like it's a bit like a silhouette or a shadow of a child, and that's always there next to me. And I always say sometimes that child gets really big and overpowers me. And there's other times where I can just see him when he's really small and he's watching me, and he's never ever going to go away whatsoever, but it's always there. And it's about what I do now in the moment, rather than worrying about what happened in the past or, being anxious about the future. And I struggled a lot with that, about living in the moment and realizing that this thing that was still a part of me, people think, it's going to go away because you've been in therapy, etc. It's like, it doesn't go away. Like, you can't imagine what goes through my mind or my thoughts or my dreams. And that's not what people should think about it when it comes to recovery. It's these things still haunt us. It's just about how we behave and how we act about it, and understand that it's okay to feel bad and okay to feel crap about it, because it did happen to us. We can't just push it to one side, but it's about the here and now, and only you then have got the opportunity to do something about that.
As you kind of embarked on a career in catering, in chefing, that started to give you more kind of, I guess, belief in yourself, more direction. Did that kind of escalate as you became more and more successful, I guess, and working in different restaurants around the world?
I mean, it's really hard to say, because I hated being a chef. Still do. It's rubbish. There's nothing good about hospitality whatsoever. Long nights, unsociable hours, toxic work environments, absolutely, mental chefs that I've worked for that are extremists and bullies and everything you can think of. I've worked with them. But the skill to be able to know how to cook, that was really empowering. A lot of that comes from my early days, as well as seeing the very, very few memories I've got of my mum before she left was her being in the kitchen. Me and my sister have got a birthday the day after each other, 3 years apart. So we always had shared birthdays on the weekend. We'd have a shared birthday party. And my mum used to just spend time in the kitchen cooking and baking, and then we weren't allowed in. And then when we had the party, there was just food. And, it was just, I guess it comes from that really of being around food and somebody making something. And yeah, and food for me it's really, really pivotal to my life. I've got allergies and autism, so food has a very different impact on me than it does on other people. And so I had to research it and understand it, and that's what being a chef allowed me to do. It allowed me to understand food and work with food and taste food and be exposed to food, and then do something with it, which was good. So feeding people, it's one of the greatest things I think you could ever do. If you make food and people sit around and enjoy it, it's just overwhelming. And I thrived in that, and I just didn't like the experience of being a chef, but I knew that working in those environments were building me up, building my strength and building up my resilience and my tolerance and my skill set. And I had to get as much out of it in a short time frame as possible before I moved on. And yeah, I was maybe 5 or 6 years into my career before I tried to end my life, but then I vowed never to go back into it. And that's when I went to Australia, and I think after about 2 days, I was back in the kitchen again. So, it was what I was good at. I just knew that I had to power my way through that career to get out of it as such, but then take that skill set with me into a different aspect.
And tell us about how then you started to turn your attention to food waste, and how the Real Junk Food Project started, and what that meant for you.
That was a bit of an epiphany moment. So I was working in a Italian restaurant in Melbourne, and I had to go do my regional work just north of Melbourne. It's about 3 hours north in a place called Shepparton. And they wanted to give me citizenship in the restaurant, but they couldn't do it until I'd done my regional work. And I went out and did it. I worked on an almond farm, like just bashing these trees to get almonds out of it. Like some days you literally had to stand there and wait for these almonds to ripen. Like it was that bad. It was so boring. It was so hot. And when they were ready, you'd basically put a net under the tree and you just bash the tree with a stick and collect them and pulled them. Like, honestly, it was so labor intensive, boring, hot. And whilst we were there, we were eating the same food as the pigs. There was about 8 or 9 pigs on the farm, and the farmer was feeding food to it, and the food was incredible. Like it was absolutely. I'll never forget the squashes and the apricots that came. That was so ripe and so beautiful. And I was like, why on earth is all this getting fed to pigs? Why can't we buy it? And the farmer basically spoke to me about, which will never leave me really. It's probably channeled the way that I've been throughout my kind of like activist career, I suppose you could say, an environmentalist career. He basically said, I'm not a charity, I'm a business. And, we have surplus between the farms and then we share it with each other's livestock. So I was like, why don't you feed it to the poor and needy and homeless? And he was like, why should I? Because this is, it's about keeping me, alive and keeping my livestock. And, it's about us. I can't afford to do stuff like that. And it just made me really realize that he was completely right. For me, charity shouldn't exist and people in need shouldn't exist. And it's not this farmer's fault in the middle of bloody, not 3 hours north of Melbourne, that there is issues like this. And it was 22nd of February 2013. I was stood on this farm with a big stick bashing this tree, and I said, I'm going to create the Real Junk Food Project and feed the world with this food. Literally, just, I don't even know what the Real Junk Food Project meant, but it was all about showing people the environmental issues of food waste, but not actually trying to solve issues of poverty, and creating these inclusive environments that people could come and eat this food and potentially be part of the solution rather than sustaining this problem. And obviously, the more and more I've done this over the last 10, 12 years, the more and more I've learned globally around food waste issues and poverty and how the two are intertwined, etc. So I went back to Melbourne, and I was still working in this amazing restaurant, Gasolina. It was an Italian restaurant, and I became the head chef there. But then on my days off or my breaks, I'd go out to the little barbecues on the River Yarra, and it was like you press the button, you got 30 minutes of free heat. And I'd take all the surplus down and I'd just cook it. We were making like fruit salads and little bits of toast. I made some little jam and compotes and stuff. And it was like really, really basic stuff. But people wouldn't take the food off me because I was like trying to give it to them. I was like, do you want this? And they're like, no, we don't want it. I was like, it's food that's going to waste and we're trying to stop it from going to waste, etc. Not interested. I mean, it's a really kind of different demographic there. Very high disposable income in Melbourne. I think there's a stat that says you could eat breakfast, lunch and dinner for like 3 years without eating at the same place twice in Melbourne. So it's like some crazy stuff like that. So it's very, very about socially eating, about going out, etc. And people just didn't take to it all. But then I went to this thing called Lentil as Anything. It was created by a Buddhist monk, I believe, and a guy from Sri Lanka. And he basically set up this thing where you could go in and you could pay for the food and you paid whatever you wanted, but you got this amazing food. And he didn't happen to use food waste, but he was buying food in and getting donations. But I was like, wow, this is an amazing concept of letting people give whatever they want, because they want to take it off me for free. But if I said to them, pay me something for it, they might have paid me and took the food. It was a very, very strange dynamic. So yeah, and then that was it. And I just went around, and I think I stayed in Australia for another 3 months after that, and just researched what on earth I was about to do. I went to go work on a farm in Queensland, on a Hare Krishna farm. Spoke to this Hare Krishna leader called Madreya, and I said to him, look, I want to create these restaurants and cafes all over Australia, and let people pay what they want. And I'm going to use food waste, and people can not just pay with money, but they can pay with time and skills as well. If they want to dance, if they want to sing, if they want to give something back, they can do. And he said to me, you can't feed the world unless you feed your hometown first. And I just knew straight away. And I think he left me sat on his farm. I was on this hilltop with him, and he just left me. And I was there for about 4 hours. And I said, going, you absolute bugger. Like this kind of, he didn't mean go feed everybody in my hometown. Obviously, he meant so much more than that. But he left me there pondering it. And yeah, it just made me realize that I had to come back home. I had to come back to Leeds. I had to face my problems. I had to achieve what I wanted to achieve, where I belong and where I started, before I then go out and try and feed all the world, because otherwise I'd just be always running away from my problems. And just in that simple sentence, I knew that's what he meant. You know what I mean? And I bet he went away with a little wry smile as well, knowing that he touched a nerve. And that's what I did. Yeah. So then I came back to the UK and set up a cafe. I think I landed in 10th of December.
Did that lead you to searching for kind of therapy at that point?
No, still nowhere near that point. This was just about a mission, I guess, that I'd decided to put my heart into. So this was like at this point where I'm sat on a farm, probably 18 months to 2 years after trying to take my own life. So it's still very fresh and very traumatic. But no, man, literally after I came round in the hospital after 3 days, they just let me out. That was it. I think there might have been a follow-up of some sort, but after what I'd just done and the seriousness of it, and the fact that I had a mental health history all the way back from 11 when I was sectioned, still there was just nothing. So I just carried on. I thought, well, if no one else is bothered, I'm just going to carry on. So that's what I did. And this was something that I put my heart into straight away. And like, I'm going to do this. And yeah, I created a project. It was my project. And then that was something I was able to put my energy into all of a sudden.
What was the momentum? How did it scale? Were you surprised at the support?
Well, at first we had a cafe. We opened it up and we let people pay what they wanted. It was in a very rough area of Leeds, which I'd never been to as a kid. And I was just there doing it kind of voluntary for a while, just getting surplus food. In some points, I was even jumping through bins and getting stuff out of bins, then showing people what was getting thrown away. And we were cooking with it. And it wasn't until about 3 months after I started it, I think it was around March 2014, The Guardian came. And this bloke came with a camera, and I remember my son was born in the January that year 14. So he was on a couple of months old, and he was in this little kind of carry holder with me, and I was, taking him around with me, and this guy was filming me, and there was a little bit of land across the road from the cafe, which was a mess, and we went outside and tidied it up a little bit, and, this guy was filming me doing it. I mean, it was absolutely bonkers because I don't know what I was doing. And it went online, and I think we had about 100,000 people in 24 hours, 48 hours contacting us from all over the world. Families sending me videos of their children going hungry, and people in Argentina as well. I remember messaging me saying, come here and do this. And I was like, I'm in Armley in Leeds. How on earth am I going to be in Argentina and Armley at the same time? And yeah, it just exploded. That was it. People from all over wanted to copy me. I kind of socially franchised the model and let people copy it and do it. And by 2016, which was 3 years later, we had 126 concept cafes in 7 countries, from Israel, South Korea, Japan, Germany, France, and then UK. There was about 90 projects across the UK, and then I think I had about 30 just in Leeds at one point, all concept kind of pop-up, pay-as-you-feel things. But it kind of like coincided with when austerity happened and the landfill tax went through the roof, which a lot of people don't know about. And then they had all this food to be redistributed from supermarkets, and a lot of people didn't realise it was because they were all trying to do good and because they all care about the climate. It's because they were trying to stop themselves spending so much money on landfill. And there wasn't anaerobic digestion around at that time as much as it is now, so people wasn't able to send it to energy. So yeah, there was just abundance of food, obviously all of a sudden being available, and I was able to tap into it, and I was very good at it, and we had a lot of attention, and people wanted to be a part of it, and it just exploded, and I just rode the wave. The autistic part of me is like, it's not phased by emotions, so I don't get happy or sad or excited about stuff. It's just things happen, so I just do it. It's a very black and white matter for me. So I was filming with Youth at the Waiting Stall, Jamie Oliver. I was doing a TED talk in Warwick University. I was voted one of the most influential men in the world. It was just like, it was just another thing. And I went and did it, and then the next day I did something else. So I rode the wave, and I wasn't overwhelmed by it. I probably got caught up in it a little bit. It got to the point where maybe my ego got caught up in it, and I was too caught up in it and wasn't kind of in the moment, and I wasn't respectful of maybe the people around me that was doing the things they were doing for me, especially giving up their time to help. And so yeah, I got caught up in that a little bit. But yeah, it wasn't kind of like that I was aware of the scale of what was happening, or that I was conscious of the impact of the rise and growth of the project, in a very short space of time. It wasn't. It was just another thing.
Did you feel that you had a purpose, though? Did you feel that this is something I can do and I'm doing it?
Yeah, it was the drive to kind of the passion to feel like I was doing something positive and I could create change. And then there were loads of people around me, and I just got caught up in stuff really, really, really naively. People are promising things and people want to be a part of it. And, I was grasping every opportunity, like I said earlier. So no matter what, I would just say yes and just do stuff with people, new people coming on board. And, somebody said to me, everybody's chasing you. And it made me realize that I wasn't kind of doing this alongside people. I was running off and doing it. There's a lot of amazing founders and CEOs and people in lots of different industries that you see even on, in the news and stuff, that are the figurehead of their organization. But you can see there's a sense of that the people behind the scenes are not quite in line with, probably the most famous example is Elon Musk, isn't it? He's going off and doing what he wants and saying what he wants, and everybody else behind the scenes has to deal with that. At the time when it was happening to me, I was a victim of that, of going, there's a lot of amazing people here, and people kept leaving and going, and I didn't care, honestly. At the time it was like, yeah, they're going, there's nothing I can do to stop them, so I'll just move on to someone else or someone else. And it wasn't until someone sat me down and was like, you're going to keep losing lots and lots of good people if you don't stop. Somebody told me it's about building structure. It was like, you don't really have much structure. At the time I remember he was in the cafe and he said to me, he didn't want to join because there's not a lot of structure here. I was like, what do you mean structure? Like, we do this with this. And then I knew what he meant now, because obviously I've built businesses now that I do have a lot of infrastructure and policies and procedures and all the other stuff that goes with it. But at the time I didn't have a clue. And I was just riding this wave completely naively as this person that was a figurehead that was in the news, the front page of the big issue and all this other stuff. And I was like, this is it, innit? But then not realizing there was not really much behind the scenes except for a bunch of people all trying to stop food waste, basically, which, was amazing in itself. But yeah, if I'd have done it now, I could have probably built a better foundation than I did.
Do you think you were, as you'd done when you were much, much younger, do you think you were just working it out for yourself? Was that your kind of fallback?
Yeah, absolutely. And just listening to everybody, and, if somebody said, this is how you do it, I'd go do it, rather than maybe getting a second opinion or doing my due diligence or anything like that. I'd just be like, yeah, this person says this, let's go do it. And everyone's like, what are you talking about? Like, they're talking rubbish. And I'd just be like, yeah, but that's what they said. But that's just the way it was, because obviously that's how I'd have grown up. It was like, I think the best analogy that I've come up with is that life is like a hammock, and there's people in life who have grown up with, decent upbringing, a house, gone to school and achieved, and their hammock has lots of different strings. So it might be family, it might be extended family, it might be finances, everything. And at times I had like one string on my hammock, it was like pretty much life, I was alive. So I was always trying to reconnect these like strings in ways that I didn't understand. And so like if somebody came along and was like, oh yeah, I can do this, I'd be like, oh sweet, let's. So I was kind of like when I was younger, especially when I was in care and prison, and when I was institutionalized and sectioned for over a year, when I was like 11 or 12, it was basically I was grasping onto the next person that showed me attention, or just to get to the next stage. It was kind of like a monkey swinging through the jungle as such on vines. That's what it was like, and I had to literally grab onto the next one to get to where I needed to be, and that was my life. It was never kind of like I could never just go on the ground and walk, and it consistently. It was swinging and backwards and forwards, and then waiting to get the next thing. And that's the best thing I come up with as an analogy is that now in my life I have a mortgage, I have a family. I've just lost my job, but I had a job and got finances, so that when one of those string breaks, it's not that I end up on the street or that I end up back in drugs and alcohol or that I end up in prison. That's what I say to people is that I had to build all that up, but I had to literally just make it up, and then learn from people who were strangers, learn from people that had been in my life, and never have that constant connection with anybody that could maybe guide me or support me, which is what, most people have with, parents and family. Even though sometimes they get it wrong, at least they've still got that bond and that connection, which I just don't have. So yeah, I was literally running a project, being, touted as one of the most influential men in the world and doing TED Talks, and just absolutely behind the scenes, not having a clue what I was doing.
Moving on from that then, how did things become perhaps less chaotic then? How did you mature, if that's the right word, in terms of your approach?
Yeah, so I had to go back to therapy. I unfortunately got into a relationship with somebody that was in the project, and then it went really wrong, completely down to me. And it was then that I realised that a lot of good people were going to be leaving me and the project. And I went back to one of my therapists, who was my therapist when I was sectioned at 11. I got in touch. I was like, "Oh, do you remember me, that smart, angry kid that everybody used to say?" And she did. And I still talk to her now. And yeah, we sat down and we went through some like PTSD therapy. And she realised at the time, and after, it was only about 6-7 sessions, that something else was going on here. And that's when I was diagnosed with the autism. And she was like, "Your brain is able to do things which a lot of people can't do." And, I was processing trauma like in 30 minutes, in sessions, doing EDMR therapy and stuff. And just, she was like, "You're moving way ahead." And I was like, "Yeah, but I need to just get all this out of my head. I've got dreams and images and situations which I don't even know if they're real or not, and my brain can't understand them." And I was trying to do it all really, really quickly, and even she was quite astounded at the kind of the speed I was doing this. But I was like, I feel like I'm ready to move on. I want to not be this traumatic kid anymore, and I need to be this person that people associate me with. But I wasn't there, and then I had to go away and do a lot of kind of, I think the only best way to describe it is kind of closure. So I went to streets and houses and people that I'd grown up with, either people I'd hurt, places where things had happened to me, and I just went to these places and just processed everything. Literally years worth of stuff that happened, I was processing in a matter of minutes, and just kind of trying to reframe it all in my head and just put it to one side and close it and say, look, it's done, it's gone, it's not even the same place anymore, or they're not the same people, I'm not the same person. I had to go back and apologize to a lot of people who were just like, "Don't worry, I've moved on," etc., etc. But I was like, "Well, that's great, but you'll probably never hear from me again." That kind of thing. I'm not here to be a friend. Probably some really stupid stuff. People that I probably shouldn't have even reached out to, that I either hurt too much or, hurt me a lot. But I did it, and I just felt like, this is just all about me dealing with it the way that I need to deal with it to be able to just move on, so these things can't haunt me, or so that I can't not process situations or understand them as well, which was the hardest thing. Because when you're a child and then something's going on and you can sense it, but then people tell you something else is going on, it's not the truth. When you're an adult, you say to a child, "Don't worry about it," or you come up with white lies just to kind of make sure that you don't, give them any bad memories as such. That just didn't sit for me. I'd rather just say, your dad's just beaten or raped your mum up, and he's been arrested for it while on your sister's bed while she was asleep when she was 4, instead of me getting led out by the police and not being told everything and seeing everything and knowing what had happened, but nobody told me. I wish people had just said it to me, because I could have just processed it. And even though I was a 9-10-year-old child, I just feel like we underestimate the power of a child's brain, or especially somebody with autism like myself, what it means at the time to not be lied to or to be confused about situations, because it was up until like 11, 12 years later that I was still going, what on earth happened in that situation? Why can't I open presents? Why can't I accept compliments? Why can't all these things happen to me? because I had to walk past my presents when I was 10 years old and never got to open them. And, my dad had been arrested, my mum was bloodied and beaten up, etc. No one told me what the hell was going on. So yeah, there's a very, very kind of, I don't know how to explain it really, but it's hard to, when I went back to therapy and when I started talking about this stuff, it was like, am I trying to accept these situations? Do I want apologies? Do I want explanations? Or is it about me accepting where I am now and where I could be in the future? Because I couldn't probably even be where I am now if I didn't go and do that for myself. And I felt like I was ready. I was ready. I left myself completely exposed and vulnerable and said, look, just give it to me. Tell me, if I'm an asshole, just tell me. If it's me, tell me, because I need to be able to stop doing this. This type of behavior. It's not healthy for me. It's not healthy for my family. It's not healthy for the world as well, especially when I was kind of a public figure, if with all due respect. So yeah, I felt like I was put on this pedestal, but there was a lot of stuff from the past that was still bringing me down behind the scenes that people were not aware of.
And so appreciate that recovery is a ongoing thing, but following the therapy, and I appreciate you're still talking to your therapist, did that enable you to go on to the next stage in terms of what you were achieving in the kind of food surplus and environmental, societal kind of reform?
Definitely, yeah. My head was clearer. I was able to process things better, deal with situations better. Even just confrontations. I probably avoided confrontations in the past because my dad beat me as a kid, and even now I feel like I've got the capacity to be able to confront situations and even step back sometimes in confrontational situations and process things in the moment that I could never do before. Just even simple things like that, which have meant that I'm able to do other things. So, approach HR, absolutely terrible at it, rubbish with people. But in the last, say, 2 years, I've had to hire people, fire people, I've had to do disciplinary and stuff. And I just feel like the openness, the transparency, the kind of no bullshit kind of approach, and also the kind of emotional capacity not to feel the charge in my chest, and react to that. That's what I've been able to do, which has probably meant I'm able to do a lot of other things better. So I'm probably a better dad to my children. I'm probably, I'd say better in relationships, but I'm rubbish at relationships. But I'm probably a better boss, especially for it. I think people have benefited from that. I've managed to retain people for like 6-7 years now within the organisation who've been with me such a long time, and they probably say we have friendships. I don't really understand what a friend is, but I feel like people trust in me and I trust in them a lot more than I did in the past. It was a very kind of disposable kind of social life that I had. Even to this day, I don't even really know who my friends are, if I've got any, because I don't understand that concept of what it means. But I feel like having a lot more consistent people around me has happened since the therapy than it would have done if I didn't go into therapy. And I probably would have I don't think I'd have gone to the depths of trying to set my life, which I did, but it was always the kind of destructive mode of going up and then self-destructing and going right back down to the bottom again and working my way up. Whereas now, if something goes wrong, like I lost my job recently, I haven't panicked and I've found ways to get through that situation. Whereas before it would have been, I would have probably gone to something even further extreme because I was at that depths. Drink, drugs, some kind of debaucherous lifestyle, whatever. That's not happening now. So I feel like even though it may have not been an instant benefit as such, I can see throughout my life as I'm growing older and my children are growing older, I can see how much of an impact it's having on me.
In terms of your feeding the world, feeding millions of people, where are you with that then? What's the kind of next?
Well, I still haven't fed all the world, so I'm still going to set out to do that. I just feel like food is my life. Even if I lost my job recently, but I didn't apply for jobs that were food associated, and yet still people have come to me on the side and said, we've got this project, we're doing this. And so I'm still involved with food, and, it still has a massive role in my life. And I feel like at the capacity where I'm at now, I've been a CEO since 28, so I'm 40 this year, and in a position of leadership, but not just in a position of leadership, but also like a public figure as well, and been this activist and environmentalist that's been on TV and, proven with my track record of the things that I'm able to do. There's very different conversations happening now, which involve things at a much greater capacity, so feeding hundreds and millions of people, hundreds of thousands of people rather than tens and hundreds of people, which is what I've done in the past sporadically. So the things that I'm able to probably put my mind to are probably going to have an even greater impact, but I'll still stay true to the project that I created and hopefully benefit that. But when my time has probably come where it doesn't need me anymore because it does amazing stuff, it's self-sufficient, pays its wages, does amazing stuff. But I'm able to go out now at a much higher capacity and hopefully bring people into the project, but hopefully have a greater impact in doing other work as well, which just happens to be around food. So yeah, the whole kind of concept of feeding the world, it wasn't about me standing there with a giant pot of stew and handing out ladles of people in queues with little bowls, begging for more. It was all about empowerment. It was about education. It was about how to create systematic changes. And that has happened in my short kind of career in 10 years. When people used to turn their nose up at waste food, now people are shopping in supermarkets, and just seeing it as food. Where it used to be called waste, it's now surplus. And I was involved in all of that, inspired and empowered so many people to go in and do that. And now it's seen as kind of like the norm. We've got a lot further to go, and there's a lot of things I would like to do see in terms of change in my lifetime. But I do believe that I may be around that table when it comes to those discussions around how those changes look. And hopefully I can play a role in some of those decisions and have some of that impact, because I feel like my brain is capable enough to do that. I've always thought elitist, which is really, really hard for some people to understand. But one good example is, I think I was about 6 or 7. I was in a school for it must have been about 4 weeks or something. I was in this primary school for. I must have had about 20 or 30 primary schools when I was a kid. It was bonkers. I was in this one school called Greenwood Primary. It's not there anymore. And I'd been thrown out of the school for misbehaving. I can't remember what I did. I think I threw something at somebody else. I can't remember what it was. It was some act of violence, but I didn't hurt anybody. And because I got thrown out, I had to go speak to the head teacher, and the head teacher was busy, and he made me sit outside his office. And I think they were waiting for one of my parents to arrive. And I was in year 4 or 5, and there was a bunch of year 6 students that were sat around a big table outside the office, and the teacher was obviously busy, and he said to me, "Go sit with these kids. They're designing some kind of poster. Can you go and sit and help them?" Now, obviously, I'd only been at school a very short amount of time. These kids were 2 years above me. They certainly didn't want me to sit around them. And so they were designing a road safety poster about how to cross the road or something. It was like something, I can't remember what it was. Oh, it's fire safety. It was due to fire safety, because I remember the prize, so it was something to do with fire. It was fire safety, and they had to create a poster for fire safety. And these kids just wouldn't let me join in at all. So I sat there and I created a board game. So I got this piece of cardboard and I made this board game, and all the schools across the region got to enter, and we won. And the board game won. And we got to go to a McDonald's, and it was, I can't remember what the name of the elephant was, but it was this big giant red elephant that the West Yorkshire Fire Service used as their mascot. And it was on the front page of the Evening Post as well in Leeds. And so there's just me, this little kid, and then a bunch of these students and this elephant and some firemen. And the whole school took credit for it, but it was just me that had come up with this silly little board game because I was bored and these kids wouldn't let me sit with them. And I tell people the story, and I was like, it's always been in me to think above and beyond and to go, somebody wants to create a poster, I want to create a board game. Somebody wants to open up a shop to feed people, I want to feed the world. That's always when I was on that farm and I was bashing that tree and I said, I'm going to create the real jungle, I'm going to feed the world. I didn't want to go feed Melbourne, or it was instant in my head, I'm going to go feed the world this. So I feel like I've always had that capacity and that mindset to do things on a bigger level, and I just needed the opportunities, and I've had to create it myself and obviously show people what I can do. And I feel that's my time now. That's my path. There's some of the conversations I'm having with 2 or 3 people are talking about huge projects will have massive impacts. They all revolve around food. They intertwine with one another, but they all relate back to the project that I've got as well. So yeah, there's some really, really interesting things to happen. And then who knows, like I said, the goal is to feed the world, and I don't really know how I'm going to get there, but that's the ultimate goal. And I think that's a lot of things with like people who are neurodivergent, is like we set goals, but we don't understand the path. But sometimes you don't really need to know how you're going to get there. It's just, like I said, it's about the mindset of saying, I am going to get there somehow. And that's just the way I think. And hopefully that's what I'll be able to achieve. But another thing I said when I started it was that I didn't want to lay on my deathbed and turn around to my children and say I didn't try. And, I still feel like I've got more to give. And therefore, and my son now who's 11, he comes to the project, he volunteers there on days when he's on holiday or after school sometimes, and he serves customers and he's helped me do all sorts of wonderful things. There's loads of pictures of him with like group volunteers and, and I just feel like, wow, I was able to do, there's not many kids that can go work in a massive food warehouse and get on a forklift with their dad and, move massive pallets around or go to places and see things that, the kids would never even be able to dream of. Thousands of pallets of food and drink being thrown away. He's seeing things. So I feel like, wow, that's amazing that I can just give him this opportunity. He might go on and do something completely different in life. And, I'd fully support him to do that. But that's what it was about. It's like, can I create a world that I can inspire and empower my children and other children, and also something that can have a great impact on other people? And yeah, I feel like I'm now in a position where I can say that I've done that.
Where can people find out more or buy food? Where do they go?
So the website does everything for us, surplus2purpose.com. We've just moved, unfortunately. We have to left our Leeds warehouse and we're now in our Bradford shop. So that people can order online, they can come shopping with us, they can volunteer as part of a work day, as part of a corporate group. There's a section on there about Adam, which obviously tells you about the stuff that I've done, things like this, podcasts around mental health and things that I do around the environment and food and also how to get in touch as well. So it's all through the website. And obviously socials, Surplus to Purpose is on our socials. People can follow our story. We've just got something going on at the moment where we're trying to rescue, God knows how many tons it is, but there's tons and tons of cauliflowers that are going to waste. And we're trying to rescue them, and people can donate £5 and it pays the grower to release these cauliflowers and stop them from ploughing them into the land. So there's lots and lots of like activities and events that we're always up to, mischievous things where we're trying to stop waste and save the planet at the same time. So yeah.
Okay, well, we'll put the link in the show notes as well. Let me just finish, if I may. Just what would you say to somebody listening to this podcast who connects with what you've experienced, maybe not necessarily autism or other sorts of kind of neurodivergent attributes, but what would you say to someone who's perhaps just feeling lost or not really found their way yet? What can they do?
I think the hardest thing for me is if you put out online or, that you're struggling, or I put out a post recently just saying I'm in a really bad way at the moment, mentally and physically, because I've lost my job and I didn't know where I was going to turn. And people always go, but it's going to be okay. Don't worry. There is a, time is a healer and all these things. Like the hardest thing for me is like, that doesn't mean anything. It just doesn't mean anything to me. It doesn't mean anything to those in the moment as well. Like, if you can imagine and put yourself sometimes in a position of somebody that feels like things are so bad that they're going to end their life, and then to carry out that act and to go through that emotion of doing it, knowing that you're doing this to yourself and what is going to happen, and knowing that there's nothing afterwards. That's it. You're gone. It's really, really hard to read comments where people are saying everything's going to be okay. Don't worry. I've been through that. Like it's not. If you've gone past the point of no return, there's nothing. It's hard, especially when you're also sat there feeling like there's nothing else whatsoever. You've got no support. Like I said, the hammock, you've cut all your strings. There's no finances. You're drinking or you're addicted to something, and maybe one thing has tipped you over the hedge. Like an argument or something. And I just feel like when you're in that moment, I remember that specific moment when I think I'd gone to a family member's house and asked them to buy some drugs off them. And I poured it into this bottle of water, thinking if I just down this bottle of water, that'll help speed up the process. Stupidly, it kept my heart beating. When they found me, they just missed my heartbeat. That's why I was pronounced dead. But then the Class A drugs had just kept my heart beating. That moment when I had that bottle and I poured these drugs in, I remember it. I remember it like I'm sat there now doing it. It's really, really, really difficult to know what to say or do, because I don't know if anything could have stopped me. Even if somebody had found me, I'd parked myself in the middle of the woods. Like, I just don't know if anything could have stopped me. So it's really, really difficult to say in the moment when you've got there that things will be all right if you don't do it, etc. For me, and a lot of people say this to me about what would you say to like, your 10-year-old self and stuff. And I'm like, I wouldn't say anything. I'd have just gone back and hugged him. He just needed a hug. And I feel like there was a piece of work that came out for something called Simon on the Streets in Leeds, which is a homeless organisation. And they said at the point of trauma, it can take up to 11 years for somebody to become homeless. 11 years after the point of trauma. Like, it's not like something happens to them and the next day they're on the street homeless. It's 11 years of everything you can imagine that could happen to you in your life before that person then becomes homeless. And I just feel like there's a lot more work we can do to be preventative. And sometimes it means being in the moment with somebody, it means reacting to a situation or not reacting to a situation. All these things can develop over time that could put somebody into a position where they're going to feel like enough is enough. So for me, if somebody's in that situation, feel like there's very little you can do. There is very little. I know it's really hard to contemplate, but it's hard. There's things that we could have done a lot more before. And there's a lot of people that could have helped me, that could have stopped me, that could have put their arm around me, could have hugged me, made me feel loved, not neglected, etc., etc. And I feel like that's what we should be doing more of and focusing on is go hug your children, tell them you love them, do the things that are difficult, and trust me, those things will have a huge impact. I remember things that people said to me. I remember things that people did to me, how they made me feel when it was positive, when I felt loved, and I attached myself to that. I didn't get enough of it. And even now to this day, I've got 2 children, and I tell my daughter everything. I live with my daughter, and I tell her every day I love her. When I see my son after school, I hug him and I kiss him. And I don't care if his friends are watching him or if he feels embarrassed. I'm hugging him and I'm kissing him. Because when he's older, he'll remember that I hugged him and I kissed him no matter what. I made him feel like I loved him. And I think that's more important, Phil. Because if we do that more, then people wouldn't end up in the situations that I were in. And I think that's like I said, I know so many people who are not here anymore. And, there's lots of things when you look back and go, fuck, I could have said this, I could have done this, or, and all that regret. Don't have that regret. Go out and just hug them, kiss them, make them laugh, whatever it is, reach out to them because it means so much. It really, really does. So that when you end up potentially in those situations, even now when I've been in my dark days, I've got a friend and sometimes he'll just talk to me about football. And that's all he talks to me about. And he just messages me. I don't live anywhere near him. But I can just message him at any point and talk crap about football with him. And, it's just, he'll reach out to me no matter what and just talk about football. Even when he don't, last night when we were talking about the European Cup final, he's messaging me now about how funny it is, etc. And, it's just little things like that where you feel like wanted or somebody's wanting to give you attention. It's not tokenistic, it's not passive. It's real intent. I feel like those kind of moments and that kind of behaviour is much more important than what can we do or say to somebody that's in that moment, because it's really, really difficult to go, I know what you're feeling, because I don't. You're a 30, 40-year-old bloke about to take your own life. Like, I can only imagine what you've been through and what's been said. So, yeah, I just feel like there's more that we can do, Phil, as people and as society to go out and prevent those things a lot more. Go and hug somebody and just let them feel loved and cared for, because it sounds so silly, but it means so much.
Brilliant. That's a really perfect way to finish this interview. Thank you, Adam. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Midlife Men podcast with me, Philip Briscoe. If you can relate to Adam's experience and need immediate help, you can call Samaritans on 116 123 if you're in the UK. Or if you're in the US, you can call the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. And if you're in Australia, call Lifeline on 131114. As always, we recommend that you speak to a GP or a mental health professional. If you want to donate, volunteer, shop, or just find out more about Surplus to Purpose, then visit the website www.surplus2purpose.com. To help raise the profile of the podcast, I'd be really grateful if you could leave a rating or review on your preferred platform or directly on the website at mid-lifemen.com. Finally, there's now a book called Men Speak Up, Journeys Through Mental Health, which is based on the podcast and available on Amazon and other online retailers.